Diatonic and chromatic are terms in music theory that are most often used to characterize scales, and are also applied to musical instruments, intervals, chords, notes, musical styles, and kinds of harmony. They are very often used as a pair, especially when applied to contrasting features of the common practice music of the period 1600 to 1900. These terms may mean different things in different contexts. Very often, diatonic refers to musical elements derived from the modes and transpositions of the white note scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. In some usages it includes all forms of heptatonic scale that are in common use in Western music. Chromatic most often refers to structures derived from the chromatic scale, which consists of all semitones. Historically, however, it had other senses, referring in ancient Greek music theory to a particular tuning of the tetrachord, and to a rhythmic notational convention in mensural music of the 14th through 16th centuries. History. Greek genre. In ancient Greece there were three standard tunings of a lyre. These three tunings were called diatonic, chromatic, and inharmonic, and the sequences of four notes that they produced were called tetrachords. A diatonic tetrachord comprised, in descending order, two whole tones and a semitone, such as A, G, F, E. In the chromatic tetrachord the second string of the lyre was lowered from G to G flat, so that the two lower intervals in the tetrachord were semitones, making the pitches A, G flat, F, E. In the inharmonic tetrachord the tuning had two quarter-tone intervals at the bottom A, G, F, E. For all three tetrachords, only the middle two strings varied in the pitch. Medieval coloration. The term chromatico was occasionally used in the medieval and Renaissance periods to refer to the coloration of certain notes. The details vary widely by period and place, but generally the addition of a color to an empty or filled head of a note, or the coloring in of an otherwise empty head of a note, shortens the duration of the note. In works of the Ars Nova from the 14th century, this was used to indicate a temporary change in meter from triple to double, or vice versa. This usage became less common in the 15th century as open white note heads became the standard notational form for minims and longer notes called white mensural notation. Similarly, in the 16th century, a form of notating secular music, especially madrigals was referred to as chromatic because of its abundance of colored-in black notes, that is, semi-minims and shorter notes, as opposed to the open white notes commonly used for the notation of sacred music. These uses for the word have no relationship to the modern meaning of chromatic, but the sense survives in the current term coloratura. Renaissance Chromaticism. The term chromatic began to approach its modern usage in the 16th century. For instance, Orlando Lassu's Prophetiae Sibyllarum opens with a prologue proclaiming, "These chromatic songs, heard in modulation, are those in which the mysteries of the Sibyls are sung intrepidly," which here takes its modern meaning, referring to the frequent change of key and use of chromatic intervals in the work. This usage comes from a renewed interest in the Greek genre, especially its chromatic tetrachord, notably by the influential theorist Nicola Vicentino in his treatise on ancient and modern practice, 1555. Diatonic scales. Medieval theorists defined scales in terms of the Greek tetrachords. The gamut was the series of pitches from which all the medieval scales are notionally derived, and it may be thought of as constructed in a certain way from diatonic tetrachords. The origin of the word gamut is explained at the article hexachord. Here the word is used in one of the available senses. The all-encompassing gamut as described described by Guido di Arezzo. The intervals from one note to the next in this medieval gamut are all tones or semitones, recurring in a certain pattern with 5 tones and 2 semitones in any given octave. The semitones are separated as much as they can be between alternating groups of 3 tones and 2 tones. Here are the intervals for a string of ascending notes from the gamut. T T T S D T S D T T S D. And here are the intervals for an ascending octave from the gamut. TSD-TSDT in its most strict definition. Therefore, a diatonic scale is one that may be derived from the pitches represented in successive white keys of the piano, the modern equivalent of the gamut. This would include the major scale and the natural minor scale, but not the old ecclesiastical church modes, most of which included both versions of the variable note B flat. Modern meanings. There are specific applications in the music of the Common Practice period, and later music that shares its score features. Most, but not all writers, accept the natural minor as diatonic. As for other forms of the minor, exclusive usage, some writers consistently classify the other variants of the minor scale, the melodic minor and the harmonic minor, as non-diatonic, since they are not transpositions of the white note pitches of the piano. Among such theorists, there is no agreed general term that encompasses the major and all forms of the minor scale. Inclusive usage. Some writers consistently include the melodic and harmonic minor scales as diatonic also. For this group, every scale standardly used in common practice music and much similar later music is either diatonic or chromatic. Mixed usage. Still other writers mix these two meanings of diatonic, and this may lead to confusions and misconceptions. Sometimes, though not always, the context makes it clear which meaning is intended. There are a few other meanings of the term diatonic scale, some of which take the extension to harmonic and melodic minor even further, to be even more inclusive. In general, diatonic is most often used inclusively with respect to music that restricts itself to standard uses of traditional major and minor scales. When discussing music that uses a larger variety of scales and modes, writers often adopt the exclusive use to prevent confusion. Chromatic scale. A chromatic scale consists of an ascending or descending sequence of pitches proceeding always by semitones. Such a sequence of pitches would, for example, be produced by playing black and white keys of a piano in order, without leaving any out. The structure of a chromatic scale is therefore uniform throughout, unlike major and minor scales which have tones and semitones in particular arrangements. Musical instruments. Some instruments, such as the violin, can be played in any scale. Others, such as the glockenspiel, are restricted to the scale to which they are tuned. Among this latter class, some instruments, such as the piano, are always tuned to a chromatic scale and can be played in any key, while others are restricted to a diatonic scale, and therefore to a particular key. Some instruments, such as the harmonica, harp, and glockenspiel, are available in both diatonic and chromatic versions. Intervals. Because diatonic scale is itself ambiguous, distinguishing intervals is also ambiguous. For example, the interval B-flat is considered diatonic if the harmonic minor scale is considered diatonic, but it is considered chromatic if the harmonic minor scale is not considered diatonic. Additionally, the label chromatic or diatonic for an interval may be sensitive to context. For instance, in a passage in C major, the interval C-E-flat could be considered a chromatic interval because it does not appear in the prevailing diatonic key. Conversely, in C minor it would be diatonic. This usage is still subject to the categorization of scales as above, e.g., in the B-E-flat example above. Classification would still depend on whether the harmonic minor scale is considered diatonic. In different systems of tuning in equal temperament, there is no difference in tuning between intervals that are inharmonically equivalent. For example, the notes F and E sharp represent exactly the same pitch, so the diatonic interval CF sounds exactly the same as its inharmonic equivalent, the chromatic interval CE sharp. In systems other than equal temperament, however, there is often a difference in tuning between intervals that are inharmonically equivalent. In tuning systems that are based on a cycle of fifths, such as Pythagorean tuning and mean-tone temperament, these alternatives are labeled as diatonic or chromatic intervals. Under these systems, the cycle of fifths is not circular in the sense that a pitch at one end of the cycle is not tuned the same as the inharmonic equivalent at its other end. They are different by an amount known as a comma. This broken cycle causes intervals that cross the break to be written as augmented or diminished chromatic intervals. In mean-tone temperament, for instance, chromatic semitones are smaller than diatonic semitones, and with consonant intervals such as the major third, the inharmonic equivalent is generally less consonant. If the tritone is assumed diatonic, the classification of written intervals by this definition is not significantly different from the drawn from the same diatonic scale definition given above, as long as the harmonic minor and ascending melodic minor scale variants are not included. Chords. Diatonic chords are generally understood as those that are built using only notes from the same diatonic scale. All other chords are considered chromatic. However, given the ambiguity of diatonic scale, this definition, too, is ambiguous, and for some theorists chords are only ever diatonic in a relative sense. The augmented triad E-flat GB is diatonic to or in C minor. On this understanding, the diminished seventh chord built on the leading note is accepted as diatonic in minor keys. If the strictest understanding of the term diatonic scale is adhered to, whereby only transposed white note scales are considered diatonic, even a major triad on the dominant scale degree in C minor would be chromatic or altered in C minor. Some writers use the phrase diatonic to as a synonym for belonging to. Therefore, a chord can be said to be diatonic if its notes belong to the underlying diatonic scale of the key. Harmony. The words diatonic and chromatic are also applied inconsistently to harmony. Often musicians call diatonic harmony any kind of harmony inside the major-minor system of common practice. When diatonic harmony is understood in this sense, the supposed term chromatic harmony means little, because chromatic chords are also used in that same system. At other times, especially in textbooks and syllabuses for musical composition and music theory, diatonic harmony means harmony that uses only diatonic chords. According to this usage, chromatic harmony is then harmony that extends the available resources to include chromatic chords, the augmented sixth chords, the Neapolitan sixth, chromatic seventh chords, etc. Since the word harmony can be used of single classes of chords, diatonic harmony and chromatic harmony can be used in this distinct way also. However, chromatic harmony may be defined as the use of two successive chords which belong to two different keys and therefore contain tones represented by the same note symbols but with different accidentals. Four basic techniques produce chromatic harmony under this definition: modal interchange, secondary dominance, melodic tension, and chromatic mediance. A clear illustration of the contrast between chromatic and diatonic harmony may be found in the slow movement of Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 4 Op. 58. The long, flowing melody of the first 5 bars is almost entirely diatonic, consisting of notes within the scale of E minor, the movement's home key. The only exception is the G sharp in the left hand in the third bar. By contrast, the remaining bars are highly chromatic. using all the notes available to convey a sense of growing intensity as the music builds towards its expressive climax. A further example may be found in this extract from Act 3 of Richard Wagner's opera Die Walküre. The first 4 bars harmonize a descending chromatic scale with a rich, intoxicating chord progression. In contrast, the remaining 3 bars are entirely diatonic, using notes only within the scale of E major. The passage is intended to convey the god Wotan putting his daughter Brunhilde into a deep sleep. Miscellaneous usages. Notes in modern usage. The meanings of the terms diatonic note and chromatic note vary according to the meaning of the term diatonic scale. Generally, not universally, a note is understood as diatonic in a context if it belongs to the diatonic scale that is used in that context. Otherwise it is chromatic. Inflection. The term chromatic inflection is used in 2 senses: alteration of a note that makes it chromatic rather than diatonic. Melodic movement between a diatonic note and a chromatically altered variant. Progression. The term chromatic progression is used in 3 senses: movement between harmonies that are not elements of any common diatonic system, the same as the second sense of chromatic inflection above. In musica ficta and similar contexts, a melodic fragment that includes a chromatic semitone, and therefore includes a chromatic inflection in the second sense above. The term diatonic progression is used in 2 senses: movement between harmonies that both belong to at least one shared diatonic system. In musica ficta and similar contexts, a melodic fragment that does not include a chromatic semitone, even if 2 semitones occur contiguously, as in F-sharp G-A flat. Modulation. Diatonic modulation is modulation via a diatonic progression. Chromatic modulation is modulation via a chromatic progression in the first sense given above. Pentatonic scale. One very common kind of pentatonic scale that draws its notes from the diatonic scale is sometimes called the diatonic pentatonic scale, C, D, E, G, A, or some other modal arrangement of those notes. Other pentatonic scales may also be construed as reduced forms of the diatonic scale, but are not labeled diatonic. Modern extensions. Traditionally, and in all uses discussed above, the term diatonic has been confined to the domain of pitch, and in a fairly restricted way. Exactly which scales should count as diatonic is unsettled, as shown above, but the broad selection principle itself is not disputed, at least as a theoretical convenience. Extended pitch selections. The selection of pitch classes can be generalized to encompass formation of non-traditional scales from the underlying 12 chromatic pitch classes, or a larger set of underlying pitch classes may be used instead. For example, the octave may be divided into varying numbers of equally spaced pitch classes. The usual number is 12, giving the conventional set used in Western music, but Paul Zweifel uses a group-theoretic approach to analyze different sets, concluding especially that a set of 20 divisions of the octave is another viable option for retaining certain properties associated with the conventional diatonic selections from 12 pitch classes. Rhythms. It is possible to generalize this selection principle even beyond the domain of pitch. The diatonic idea has been applied in analysis of some traditional African rhythms. For example, some selection or other is made from an underlying superset of metrical beats, to produce a diatonic rhythmic scale embedded in an underlying metrical matrix. Some of these selections are diatonic in a way similar to the traditional diatonic selections of pitch classes, but the principle may also be applied with even more generality.